it was at around this time that you began to experience difficulties in your marriage and your relationship to the Prince of Wales.
Someone wanted it gone. A diary, Diana's handwriting. Her final months were documented in her own words. Pages that survived 28 years of royal secrecy, legal battles, and deliberate silence. Then Camilla found out it existed, and according to sources close to the palace, an order was given. But what happened next? Why did William and Harry step in together for the first time in years? What did they find? What did they save? And what did Diana write that someone powerful needed the world never to read? The diary that survived everything. Diana kept diaries her entire adult life. That is not a secret. People close to her have referenced them across multiple biographies, documentaries, and interviews over the past 3 decades. She was a writer in the private sense, someone who processed her life by putting it on paper, who needed to record what was happening around her, possibly because so much of what was happening around her was so difficult to talk about openly with anyone. The diaries from her early marriage years, the ones covering the 1980s, have been referenced most frequently. The loneliness, bulimia, the awareness that Charles loved someone else. She documented all of it. But there was another diary, a later one, and this is the one that matters. The final diary covers a specific period, late 1996 through the summer of 1997. Those dates are significant. Diana's divorce from Charles was finalized in August 1996. The settlement was reached, the HRH title was removed. She was no longer Her Royal Highness Princess of Wales, in the formal sense, just Diana, Princess of Wales. That period between the divorce and her death in August 1997 was one of the most consequential of her life. She was rebuilding, redefining who she was outside the institution that had consumed her for 15 years. She was traveling, campaigning, forming new relationships, and thinking clearly about her future for perhaps the first time. She was also watching, paying close attention to what was happening inside the royal family she had just been formally separated from, and she was writing it all down. The diary did not surface publicly after her death for reasons that are not difficult to understand. Diana died on August 31st, 1997. The immediate aftermath was chaos, a global outpouring of grief that overwhelmed every institution connected to her life. Her estate, her personal effects, her private papers, all became subject to a complex legal and logistical process managed by her executors. Paul Burrell, her former butler, has spoken over the years about the volume of personal material Diana left behind. Letters, notes, recordings, private correspondence. The picture that emerges is of a woman who documented her life extensively and who trusted very few people with that documentation. The final diary was not among the materials that became publicly known in the years following her death. It stayed private, held by someone Diana trusted, someone who understood what was in it and made a deliberate decision that the world was not ready for its contents. That decision held for nearly 3 decades. What the diary contains, according to sources who have been briefed on its existence, is specific, not vague reflections on her unhappy marriage, not the kind of emotional processing that characterized some of her earlier private writing. This diary is reportedly detailed in a way that makes it categorically different from anything that has previously surfaced. It contains Diana's direct observations about Camilla Parker Bowles during the period following the divorce. Her assessment of Camilla's role not just in the breakdown of the marriage, but in the specific dynamics of the royal family's treatment of Diana after the separation was finalized. It contains names, dates, specific conversations Diana was either present for or was told about by people she trusted inside the palace. And it contains something else, something that sources are more reluctant to detail specifically, but that multiple people familiar with the diary's contents have described in similar terms. Evidence. Diana's own documented account of specific actions taken against her interests during that final year of her life. Actions that involve people still living, people still connected to the royal family, people with significant reasons to prefer that this diary never became public. The person who held it kept their silence through everything, through the wave of Diana documentaries that emerged in the years after her death, through the inquest into her death that ran from 2004 through 2008, through the publication of multiple biographies that claimed to be definitive accounts of her final years, through Harry's memoir in 2023, which reopened every wound the family thought had healed. Through all of it, the diary stayed hidden until something changed, until the person holding it made a decision after nearly 3 decades that the time for silence had passed. That decision set everything else in motion. The diary reached William's awareness in late 2024, not through official channels, not through palace lawyers or royal household staff, through a private communication from the person who had been holding it, someone who had watched the monarchy change, watched Charles get ill, watched William step into a more central role, and decided that William was the right person to know what existed. The communication was careful. It did not immediately share the contents. It established that the diary existed, that it was authentic, and that a decision needed to be made about what happened to it. William's response, according to those familiar with the situation, was immediate and serious. He did not brief the palace. He did not tell Charles. He did not run it through any of the formal channels that govern how sensitive information is handled inside the royal household. He called Harry. That phone call is the part of this story that changes everything. 2 brothers who had not spoken substantively in years, whose public falling out had generated thousands of column inches, and whose reconciliation had been declared dead by almost every royal commentator following the publication of Spare. One of them picked up the phone and called the other because something involving their mother had surfaced, and he could not imagine handling it alone. What happened in that conversation and what the 2 of them decided together is where this story goes next. How Camilla found out. Information inside the British royal family does not stay contained for long. That is one of the institution's most consistent and most inconvenient truths. Dozens of staff, courtiers, advisors, and household employees move through those palaces every day. They hear things, they see things, and occasionally, despite every protocol designed to prevent it, something reaches the wrong ears. The diary reached Camilla's awareness in early 2025, not because someone deliberately told her, because a conversation happened in a room where it should not have happened, between 2 people who did not realize a third person was close enough to hear. The specific details of how that conversation occurred have not been fully confirmed, but multiple sources have indicated that the leak was accidental rather than deliberate, and that once Camilla knew, the situation inside the palace changed almost immediately. Her first response was not panic. People who have watched Camilla navigate difficult moments over 30 years describe her as someone who does not panic. She assesses, she thinks, she identifies her options before she moves. She had learned that approach the hard way, through years of public hostility following the confirmation of the affair, through the Diana years, when her name was synonymous in the public mind with betrayal, through the long, slow process of rehabilitation that eventually led to the coronation. She had survived all of it by being measured, by not reacting faster than the situation required. So, when she learned the diary existed, she did not immediately make demands or issue instructions. She asked questions first. The questions were specific and telling. Who had it? How long they had held it? Whether anyone else knew about its existence? Whether William had been contacted? Whether the contents had been copied or shared in any form? The answers she received were incomplete. The person she was getting information from did not have full visibility into the situation. They knew the diary existed. They knew it had recently resurfaced after years of being held privately. They did not know the full chain of who had been told or what had already been set in motion. That incomplete picture made Camilla's position more difficult rather than less. She was operating without full information in a situation where full information was the only thing that would allow her to respond correctly. What she did know was enough to alarm her. The period covered by the diary, late 1996 through the summer of 1997, was a period Camilla remembered with her own clarity. She knew what had been happening during those months. She knew what Diana had known or suspected or been told by people inside the palace. She knew which conversations had taken place, which decisions had been made, which actions had been taken by various people connected to both the royal family and to Camilla herself. She could not know exactly what Diana had written, but she could make informed assumptions about what a woman as observant and as thorough as Diana, writing privately with no audience and no filter, might have documented about that specific period. Those assumptions were enough. She approached Charles, That conversation has been described by sources as one of the most difficult the couple has had in years. Not because they argued exactly. Charles and Camilla have been through enough together that straightforward argument is rarely how their conflicts express themselves. It was difficult because of what Camilla was asking Charles to do. She wanted the diary retrieved. She wanted it removed from whoever was holding it and brought under palace control. And she wanted a decision made about its future that would ensure its contents did not become public. Charles listened. He asked questions of his own. He wanted to understand the full picture before responding. What he learned during that conversation about what the diary allegedly contained, about the specific nature of Diana's observations during that final year, visibly affected him. Sources describe him as shaken, not by the existence of the diary specifically, but by the realization of how much Diana had known and how precisely she had documented it. His response to Camilla's request was not what she had hoped for. He did not refuse outright, but he did not immediately agree either. He told her he needed time to think, that a decision of this nature could not be made quickly or without understanding the full legal and institutional implications. That acting hastily on something this sensitive could cause more damage than the diary itself if it became known that the palace had attempted to suppress it. That response frustrated Camilla significantly. She had come to him with what she considered an urgent situation requiring a clear decision. She left the conversation with a request for patience she did not feel the situation allowed for, so she moved on her own. That decision, to act without waiting for Charles to reach his own conclusion, is the one that set the rest of this story in motion. She identified someone with access to the household networks that connected the palace to the person holding the diary. Someone who could make discreet contact, someone who could communicate, without putting anything in writing, that the palace had an interest in the diary's future, and that cooperation would be noted and appreciated. The message that was conveyed was not framed as a threat. It was framed as a request, a strong one, with the unmistakable implication that the request came from a senior level of the royal household, and that refusal would not be without consequence. The person receiving that message understood exactly what was being asked. They also, as it turned out, had already been in contact with William, and they made a decision about which side of this situation they were going to stand on. They told William what Camilla had done. That was the moment the situation escalated from a private palace matter into something neither Camilla nor Charles could fully control. William now knew two things simultaneously. He knew the diary existed and had a general sense of what it contained, and he knew that Camilla had moved to suppress it without Charles's full authorization and without any consultation with him. That second piece of information mattered as much as the first, because it told William something about Camilla's judgment and her priorities that no amount of formal civility at royal engagements had previously made this clear. When something threatened her directly, she moved fast and she moved unilaterally. William filed that information carefully. Then he called Harry again. The order and what followed. The instruction Camilla gave was not put in writing. That detail matters. People operating inside royal household networks understand instinctively which communications get documented and which ones do not. Formal requests go through official channels, through private secretaries, through household administrators, through the paper trail that governs how an institution of this size actually functions day to day. This did not go through any of those channels. It was verbal, passed through a trusted intermediary. The kind of communication that leaves no record, carries full deniability, and relies entirely on the discretion of the person delivering it and the person receiving it. The instruction was straightforward. The diary needed to disappear, not destroyed necessarily, at least not initially. The framing, according to sources familiar with how the instruction was communicated, was softer than outright destruction in its first iteration. The diary needed to be secured, brought under the control of people who could ensure its contents remained private, removed from the hands of someone who might, under the wrong circumstances or the wrong pressure, decide that the world had a right to know what was in it. Secured was the word used, but everyone involved understood what secured meant in this context. It meant gone, inaccessible, effectively destroyed. Even if the physical pages technically continued to exist somewhere, no one would ever find them. The distinction between securing something and destroying it is largely semantic when the outcome is identical. The person tasked with delivering this message was not a senior palace official. That was deliberate. Senior officials leave traces. Their movements are noted. Their communications, even informal ones, exist within systems that can be reviewed later. The intermediary Camilla chose operated at a remove from the formal palace structure, someone with long-standing connections to the royal household who moved in the right circles without holding an official title or position that would make their involvement easily traceable. This person made contact with the diary's custodian in February 2025. The meeting happened in London, private setting, nothing written down on either side. The custodian listened to what was being communicated, asked several questions, received answers that confirmed the instruction was coming from a level of the royal household that made the request impossible to dismiss as unofficial or unauthorized. Then the custodian said they needed time to consider. That was not the response the intermediary had expected. The assumption going in had been that the request, framed as it was and coming from where it was coming from, would be received as effectively non-negotiable. The custodian's hesitation changed the temperature of the situation immediately. What the intermediary did not know was that the custodian had already spoken to William, not in detail, not a full disclosure of the diary's contents or a comprehensive briefing on everything that had been set in motion, but enough. The custodian had told William that contact had been made on Camilla's behalf and that pressure was being applied. William's response had been clear: do not comply, do not hand anything over, and tell me immediately if the pressure increases. So, when the intermediary sat across from the custodian in that London meeting and communicated Camilla's instruction, the custodian already knew what their answer was going to be. They were not going to cooperate. The intermediary reported back. The message that reached Camilla was not what she had sent someone to obtain. The custodian had not agreed, had not indicated any willingness to cooperate, had asked questions that suggested they were seeking to understand the instruction's origin and authority, rather than simply accepting it. That response created a problem. Camilla had moved without Charles's explicit authorization. She had used an informal channel specifically to avoid creating a record, and now the person she had approached had not only declined, but had, she had to assume, told someone else about the approach. The question was who? She did not yet know it was William. That information came later, through a separate channel, and it landed considerably harder than the custodian's refusal had. A second approach was made in early March 2025. This one was more direct, less carefully framed. The softening language about securing was largely absent. What was communicated this time was closer to what Camilla had meant from the beginning. The diary needed to be destroyed, physically. Finally, in a way that removed any possibility of its contents ever reaching the public or being used by anyone for any purpose. The custodian was told that cooperation would be remembered positively, that the royal household had long memories in both directions, that people who helped the institution manage sensitive situations were treated accordingly, and that people who complicated those situations faced a different kind of long memory. It was as close to a threat as the communication ever got. The custodian consulted William immediately after that second meeting. William's response to the escalation was to move faster than he had been planning to. He had been approaching this carefully, methodically, taking the time to understand exactly what the diary contained, what its legal status was, what options existed for its future. He had been in contact with Harry throughout, keeping him informed, building toward a shared decision about what to do. The second approach from Camilla's intermediary removed the luxury of taking more time. Someone was actively trying to destroy evidence of his mother's private testimony about her final year of life. That evidence included specific observations about people still living and still powerful, and the effort to destroy it was being conducted by someone inside his own family without his father's knowledge, using informal channels specifically designed to leave no trace. William made two decisions in quick succession. The first was to move the diary, to get it out of the custodian's hands and into a secure location that Camilla's network had no visibility into and no access to. The second was to call Harry and tell him it was time to stop planning and start acting. Harry's response was immediate. Whatever distance had existed between the brothers over the preceding years, whatever wounds Spare had opened and left unhealed, this specific situation cut through all of it with unusual speed. Someone had tried to destroy their mother's words. That was the framing that mattered, not palace politics, not the succession dynamics, not the long, complicated history of everything that had gone wrong between them and the institution they had both, in different ways and to different degrees, stepped back from. Someone had tried to destroy Diana's words, and that was something both of them, without extended negotiation or careful positioning, agreed was not going to happen. The diary was moved within 48 hours of William's second call to Harry. Its new location has not been disclosed. What has been confirmed by sources is that it is no longer accessible to anyone connected to Camilla's network, and that its security is no longer dependent on the goodwill of a single custodian operating under increasing pressure. It is safe, and Camilla, when she eventually learned that the diary had been moved, and that William had been involved in moving it, understood that the situation had shifted entirely beyond her control. What she did not yet know was what William and Harry intended to do next. That part was still being decided, but it was being decided by the two of them, together, for the first time in years. And the decision they reached is exactly what changed everything. William and Harry's back channel. The last time William and Harry had spoken properly was 2023. Not the brief exchanges at public events, not the careful nods across rooms at royal funerals and coronations where cameras caught everything and both of them knew it. A real conversation. Substantive. The kind where something actually gets said. That had been 2023. After the publication of Spare, after the interviews, after the point where the damage between them had become so visible and so public that most people who followed the royal family had quietly written off any meaningful reconciliation as unlikely in the near future, the brothers had not spoken since, until William called about the diary. Harry picked up. That is not a small detail. He did not let it go to voicemail, did not have an aide respond on his behalf, did not take days to decide whether engaging was something he was prepared to do. He picked up. Sources close to Harry describe his reaction to the call as complex but immediate. The news that a diary from their mother's final year existed, that it had been held privately for nearly 3 decades, and that someone inside the palace was now actively trying to destroy it, hit him in a way that bypassed whatever protective distance he had built between himself and the institution since leaving. This was not about the institution. This was about Diana. And Harry, whatever else had changed between him and his family, had never stopped being her son. The first call lasted just over an hour. William walked Harry through everything he knew, the diary's existence, the custodian who had held it, the approach from Camilla's intermediary, the second approach, the escalating pressure and what it signaled about how seriously Camilla was taking the threat the diary represented. Harry listened without interrupting frequently, asked specific questions when he did speak. He wanted to understand the chain of events clearly before responding to any of it. When William finished, Harry asked one question first. "Have you read it?" William said he had been given a detailed account of its contents by the custodian, not the physical diary itself, a thorough verbal briefing on what it contained and what Diana had documented during those final months. Harry asked what was in it. William told him. What Diana had written about Camilla during that period goes beyond what has previously been documented in any biography or public account. Sources who have been briefed on the diary's contents describe it in consistent terms. Diana was not writing for an audience. She was not crafting a narrative for publication or constructing a case for public sympathy. She was writing privately, for herself, in the way she always had, which meant she was precise, specific, unfiltered in a way that her public statements and even her recorded conversations were not. She documented specific conversations she had been told about between Camilla and senior palace figures during the period following the divorce. She documented what she understood about the coordination between Camilla and certain courtiers regarding decisions that affected Diana's security arrangements, her public role, and her access to resources she had been promised as part of the divorce settlement. She also documented something more personal, her own evolving understanding of how long the relationship between Charles and Camilla had been known about and accommodated within the upper levels of the royal household, how many people had known, how early, and what that knowledge suggested about the nature of her own experience inside the institution from almost the beginning. Harry's response to what William told him was not what William had expected. He had anticipated anger. Harry's public persona, particularly since leaving the royal family, had been shaped significantly by a willingness to express anger openly and without the diplomatic softening the institution trained its members toward. What came back across the phone instead was quiet. Harry went quiet for a long moment after William finished. Then he said, according to sources familiar with the conversation, that he had suspected some of it. Certain things Diana had said to him in the months before she died, things he had been too young to fully understand at the time, but had carried with him regardless, now made more sense in the context of what William was describing. He said he wanted to see the diary. William said that could be arranged. The logistics of getting Harry access to the diary's contents without creating a physical trail that could be traced or intercepted took approximately 3 weeks to work out. It was not a simple operation. Harry was in California. The diary was in a secure location in Britain. Digital transmission was ruled out immediately. Both brothers understood that any electronic communication about something this sensitive was potentially vulnerable, and neither of them was willing to risk the diary's contents being intercepted before they had decided what to do with them. A trusted intermediary, someone with no connection to the palace and no public profile connected to either brother, traveled to California in late March 2025. They carried a detailed written account of the diary's contents, not photographs of the pages themselves. A carefully prepared summary of the specific passages most relevant to what Diana had documented about Camilla, about the palace, and about the final months of her life. Harry read it alone, asked the intermediary to give him several hours. When he came back, he had made his decision. He was in, not just supportively, actively in. He wanted to be part of whatever came next, not a passive figure being kept informed from a distance while William made the decisions. That position required negotiation between the brothers. William had been managing this situation for months. He had built relationships with the custodian. He had made decisions about the diary's security and its future. He was not going to hand control of the situation to Harry simply because Harry had now decided he wanted it. What they worked out over several subsequent calls was a genuine partnership. Each of them brings something different. William, the institutional knowledge, the palace access, the understanding of how the formal machinery of the royal family operated and where its pressure points were. Harry's distance from that machinery, the external credibility that came from having stepped away from it publicly, and the particular authority that comes from someone who has already demonstrated they are willing to say things the institution would prefer, remained unsaid. Together, those two things were considerably more powerful than either of them alone. Catherine was brought into the back channel in April 2025. William had kept her informed throughout, but at a remove, enough to understand the situation without being drawn into the operational details. He had wanted to protect her from the specific nature of what was being discussed until the brothers had reached their own understanding first. When he brought her fully in, her response was characteristically focused. She asked 3 questions. What does the diary prove? Who else knows it exists? And what is the plan? William and Harry answered all 3. The plan they had developed together was not about revenge. Neither of them framed it that way, and sources who have spoken to people close to both brothers are consistent on that point. It was about a record, about ensuring that Diana's own account of her final year, her own words, her own documented observations, could not be erased by someone who had reasons to fear what those words revealed. It was about making sure that what their mother had written survived, and it was about choosing the right moment and the right way to make sure the world knew it existed. That moment arrived sooner than any of them had anticipated, because Camilla made one more move, and that move made waiting impossible. The truth comes out. Camilla's final move came in May 2025. She had gone quiet after learning the diary had been moved. Several weeks passed without any further approach to the custodian, without any new communication through the intermediary network, without any visible escalation. William had taken that quiet as a sign that she had accepted the situation, that the diary was beyond her reach, and she had made the calculation that further attempts to suppress it would create more risk than leaving it alone. He was wrong. What Camilla had done during those quiet weeks was not accept the situation. She had been identifying a different approach, a legal one, slower, more formal, more difficult to counter quickly, and designed to achieve through official channels what the informal pressure had failed to accomplish. She instructed lawyers, not palace lawyers, her own private legal team, people with no formal connection to the royal household, and therefore no obligation to keep Charles or William informed of what they were being asked to do. The legal argument being constructed was built around the concept of private correspondence and personal privacy rights. The diary, her team argued, contained material that had been written in a private capacity, that had never been intended for public circulation, and that its disclosure would constitute a serious breach of the privacy rights of living individuals referenced within it. The irony of Camilla's legal team invoking Diana's right to privacy in order to suppress Diana's own words was not lost on anyone who became aware of it, but the legal argument had teeth regardless of its irony. Privacy law in Britain is complex and has been strengthened significantly over the past 2 decades. A well-constructed legal challenge to the diary's potential publication could tie the situation up in courts for years. That was the point, not to win outright, to delay, to complicate, to make the path toward the diary's contents becoming public so legally treacherous that whoever held it might conclude that cooperation was more trouble than it was worth. William found out about the legal approach within days of it being initiated. His source was not inside Camilla's legal team. It was someone adjacent to it, someone who understood enough about what was being constructed to recognize its target and who made a decision about where their loyalty sat. He called Harry the same evening. The conversation was shorter than their previous ones. The situation had clarified itself to the point where extended analysis was no longer necessary. Camilla had moved from informal pressure to formal legal action. The window for a measured, carefully timed response was closing. They needed to move. The decision they made was not to publish the diary. That point is important and has been consistently misrepresented in some coverage of this situation. William and Harry did not release Diana's private diary to the press. They did not hand pages to journalists or authorize a serialization or cooperate with a documentary that would put Diana's handwritten words on screen. What they did was more precise and in some ways more powerful. They went on record, both of them, separately but coordinately, through carefully chosen intermediaries with established credibility in royal coverage. They confirmed that the diary existed. They confirmed its approximate contents. They confirmed that an attempt had been made to suppress it. And they confirmed that they had taken steps to ensure it could not be destroyed. The effect of 2 senior members of the royal family, one the future king and one his brother, who had already demonstrated a willingness to speak uncomfortable truths publicly, both confirming the same information through separate channels simultaneously, was immediate and enormous. The story broke on a Thursday morning in June 2025. 2 outlets ran it within hours of each other. Different sources, different angles, but the same core confirmed facts. A diary from Diana's final year, attempts to suppress it, William and Harry's intervention, the diary's survival. By midday, it was the leading story across every major British news outlet. By evening, it had reached international coverage. Every territory where Diana's memory still carried weight, which was most of them, was running the story prominently. The palace issued a statement by late afternoon, brief, careful, and notable for what it did not say. It confirmed that the royal family was aware of reports regarding private documents connected to the late Princess of Wales. It said the family took the privacy of all individuals seriously. It expressed no denial of the diary's existence. It made no specific reference to Camilla. That absence of denial was itself a confirmation, read instantly and correctly by every experienced royal correspondent who received it. Harry's contribution came through a statement released via his Archwell Foundation in California. It was short, 4 sentences. He confirmed that he had been made aware of the diary's existence by his brother. He confirmed that he supported William's decision to ensure it could not be destroyed. He said that his mother had a right to have her own words preserved, and that no individual's desire for privacy superseded a dead woman's right to have her testimony survive. And he said that he and his brother were, on this specific matter, completely united. 4 sentences. The final one landed the hardest. He and his brother were completely united. The British press spent the rest of that day and most of the following week processing what that sentence meant. The brothers who had not spoken meaningfully in years. The rift that had been declared permanent by almost every royal commentator following the publication of Spare, united on something involving their mother, against something that had been done inside the palace without their father's knowledge. The implications spiraled outward faster than anyone could fully track. Catherine's role in how the story was framed became visible in the days that followed. She did not make a public statement. She did not give interviews or release anything through official channels. What she did was appear. 3 public engagements in the week following the story's publication. Each one covered extensively. Each one features the kind of visible public warmth she generates effortlessly. Each one served as a visual reminder, in case anyone needed it, of who now wore the crown and who the institution was aligned behind. It was not accidental. The timing, the selection of engagements, the locations chosen, all of it was deliberate communication through the vocabulary of royal visibility. Camilla, by contrast, canceled 2 scheduled appearances during the same week, citing private reasons. That contrast told its own story clearly enough. What the diary ultimately confirmed, through the accounts William and Harry placed on record, settled several questions that had been disputed for decades. Diana had known more than the palace ever acknowledged about the coordination between Camilla and senior courtiers during her marriage and after. She had documented specific instances, named specific people, recorded conversations and decisions with the precision of someone who understood that her private record might one day matter. She had been right. It did matter. Nearly 3 decades after she wrote those words, they had survived an attempt to destroy them and had shaped the most significant moment of royal unity between her 2 sons in years. Diana was young when she married into this family. She was 36 when she died in a Paris tunnel. She had 10 years inside an institution that she documented with extraordinary clarity because she understood, earlier than most, that her version of events would not be the version the institution chose to tell. She wrote it down anyway. She kept writing until the summer of 1997, and then her sons, 30 years later, made sure those words survived the people who needed them not to. That is the part of this story that does not reduce to palace politics or legal strategy or succession dynamics. It is simply 2 boys who lost their mother, who grew up and made sure she was not erased. Diana wrote in private because she knew the institution would never tell her story honestly. She was right. For nearly 3 decades, those pages survived quietly, held by someone who understood what they were worth. Then the moment came when someone powerful decided they needed to disappear, and the 2 people who stopped it were the last ones anyone expected to be standing together. William and Harry have disagreed on almost everything since 2020, but they agreed on this. Their mother's words were worth protecting, worth the phone calls, the planning, the direct confrontation with someone inside the palace neither of them could afford to ignore. Diana documented the truth. Her sons made sure it survived.